2008, as a no-name blogger without a book deal or any sort of real platform, I had fought for a $300 speaking honorarium. What if instead of hustling and coming up for free, I had pushed and scraped to squeeze an extra few $100s out of the situation? Those are great questions, and I don't even have to give you a hypothetical answer. Here's what my team leader said would have happened. We would have said, "No thanks. We appreciate you responding to our request. Sorry that we couldn't make this one work out. We wish you the best on your future endeavors." The relationship would have ended before it even really began. For $300, I would have put a stake in the heart of what would eventually become my dream job. That's a really expensive $300. At the time of the decision on whether to charge, I didn't know I would work there as a full-time author and speaker 2 years later. I didn't have the vision to say, I'll pass on this $300 so that I can have my dream job later. If life were that clear, we'd never make bad decisions. But as you face free versus charged decisions, do your best to weigh out the true cost of the money you might make. Is there a big potential long-term gain that could be ruined by your short-term gain? Is this a situation where you are undervaluing your dream and need to charge? Or is it a chance to do something for free that might turn into something much bigger? Number 3, free pays dividends toward expertise. When we think about giving our dream away, we often worry about what we'll lose, namely money. If you do something for free, you do not get money. I'm a pretty awesome economist. But we sometimes lose sight of what we gain when we give our dream away. Practice, exposure, audience, and eventually, expertise. When I thought about charging Dave Ramsey for my second professional speaking gig ever, I didn't have any of those things. I'd only spoken once before, so I needed the practice. I'd never spoken anywhere with name brand recognition, so I needed the exposure of saying, I'm speaking at the Dave Ramsey headquarters. And I'd never spoken to an audience that regularly communicated with a fan base of 4.5 million radio listeners. So I needed the audience of 300 influencers. My need for expertise greatly outweighed my need for $300. Even though I couldn't foresee that 2 years later I would gain my dream job from this same speaking opportunity, I could see that the gain in experience was worth more than the gain in finances. And because I still had a day job, I could afford not to charge for that gig. The Dons weren't going to get me because I didn't quit my job the wrong way. My bills were covered. That's not to say I didn't charge for speaking at the time. I got paid by a conference for the very first time I spoke professionally. They offered me an honorarium, and I gladly accepted it. I want you to charge for your dream, and I love the stuff folks like Ben Arment with Dream Year do to help people figure out sustainable revenue models. But I want to make sure that when you wrestle with free, you don't overfocus on the money you'll lose. Jerry Seinfeld, the centerpiece of the most successful sitcom of all time, understands that principle. In an interview called Jerry Seinfeld on Comedy, he discusses a time he was working on his dream job of being a comedian. He did 2 shows a night for 18 months straight without missing a night. That's over 1,000 shows. Can you imagine how much money he made? The answer is none. Seinfeld says, we weren't being paid. We had to work, to learn, to get good enough to get work. One of the greatest comedians of all time had to give away his funny for free so he could gain enough experience to get paid for his dream job. Chances are, you will too. Although I've been speaking professionally for 3 years, I will still do some gigs for free in support of this book. I'll prepare a speech for weeks, fly from Nashville to San Diego, do the absolute best job I can, and get paid $0. Why? The success of this book matters more to me than the money I could make on the gig. I need the practice. I need the exposure. The book needs the audience. I'm not an expert yet, and free pays me dividends toward that goal. Just to jump off the script for a second, please don't interpret you not getting paid as you not deserving to get paid. That's one of the biggest traps, is that we have such a hard time seeing our dream as worth enough to get paid for it. So let me just say right now, you're worth it. You're worth charging for your dream. The thing you do, the thing that's unique to you, the thing you're pursuing, you can charge money for that. You're worth it. Don't confuse going for free with not being worth that. Don't confuse that as a talent issue. It's not a talent issue. It's not an ability issue. If you go with free, make sure it's a decision. and you see benefit to that, not out of being insecure or feeling like your dream isn't worth somebody paying money for it. The beauties and dangers of competition. Speaking of Seinfeld, last Thanksgiving, my family held a Festivus Feats of Strength contest. We didn't intend to. We only planned to run a 5K turkey trot that morning. Nobody threw down the gauntlet of competition in the weeks leading up to the holiday. It was simply our year to get together as a whole family at a beach house. We expected nothing more than some quality family time. Relaxing, beach-style downtime. Instead, we ended up in the midst of an elaborate, multi-event bloodfest that spanned all 3 days. It started with the turkey trot, which my youngest brother, Bennett, won. Then as soon as there was some blood in the water, we all started to find new ways to compete. We held a 100-yard dash on the beach contest. We held a frisbee distance throwing contest. We held a heated game of billiards. And finally, we held a jump off the dock in November and swim back to shore contest. Almost everything we did turned into a competition, save for our family game of cards. We disqualified that game because my dad likes to teach us new card games and then slowly roll out rules at his leisure. In the middle of the game, as you get what you have been told is a winning hand, he will blurt out, "Oh, I forgot a rule. 7s actually equal 4 in this game. My bad. Forgot to mention that." Convenient. I'm very competitive, so when it came time to chase my dream, that sort of competition was in the back of my mind. It will probably be in yours too, since it's so easy to see who your competition is now. 30 years ago, if you wanted to be a freelance graphic designer, you couldn't easily find the other 30 graphic designers in your niche. There were conferences and organizations, but without the internet, it was difficult to discover where you stood. Now, there are a million ways to do that. In 3 seconds, you can do a specific Google search and pull up all the websites of those who you feel might be competing against you. You can read niche periodicals online. You can join forums and see who everyone refers to as the gold standard. You can see how many Twitter followers your competition has. You can check out their blog to see how often they update it, what new clients they secured, how strong their portfolio is, and how many comments they get every day on a new post. In an afternoon, you can get a virtual wheelbarrow of intel on your competition. That can be a great thing or a horrible thing depending on how you use it. In my own experience with how competition can impact a dream, I've learned one critical thing. Competition is a great motivator, but a horrible measurement. I like to look at what other authors do on their blogs. Often, they've thought of things I would have never imagined doing. I can find new ideas or approaches or a million other things that spark my creativity. Last Christmas, for instance, I looked at TonyMorganLive.com and saw that he did 10 days of his top 10 posts from the year. He used the content to take a 10-day break during the holidays instead of having to write new posts each day. I was initially planning to just do one post with 10 links to my 10 best posts. Instead, I tried Tony's method and was able to introduce 10 days of content that a lot of people would have missed if I did it all as a single post. There are times when looking at your competition will inspire you and encourage you. It's like going to a library of active projects. That's the beautiful potential of competition, motivation. But there is also a poison you have to be wary of, using competition as a form of measurement. Pitting your dream against someone else's is a fantastic way to get discouraged and depressed. Nothing good comes from measuring your dream against your competition. If you're beating them by whatever arbitrary form of measurement you're using, you run the risk of getting cocky and lazy. Feeling ahead, you'll take a nap and relax like the hare racing the tortoise. If you're getting beat by them, you'll start to feel like a failure and think that maybe you might as well quit. Measuring yourself against the competition is a lose-lose prospect. Even if you somehow manage to avoid either of those two paths, if you're the rare person who doesn't fall into one of those two results, measuring yourself against the competition is still fairly pointless. Comparing your unique dream against someone else's is like comparing apples and skateboards. The two will never measure up precisely. I have to remember this truth all the time when I try to compare myself to MichaelHyatt.com. Michael Hyatt is a friend who has a massive blog. It's also incredibly well designed. When I look at his site and compare it to mine, I can instantly point out 6 ways I am failing, but he is succeeding. Number 1, he makes it easy to sign up for his RSS feed. Number 2, his speaking dates scroll at the top so that people can see them. Number 3, he has graphics in his posts. Number 4, his YouTube channel is easy to find. Number 5, he's speaking at a lot of publishing events, and I'm not. Number 6, he interviews really interesting authors via video. His blog is better than mine in so many ways it makes my head spin. But here's the thing. He's the CEO of a major publishing company. He's a grandfather in his mid-50s who has spent decades successfully leading businesses. He's an expert in the publishing field. Is that the goal of my dream? To work in publishing? To become a CEO? To run a massive company? Not at all. I don't want to run a publishing company. I want to be published. There's a significant difference between my dream and his dream. But when I compare myself to him, I pretend there's not. I don't know who or what you will compare yourself to when you start to hustle, but I promise you will find competition. That is a temptation that even the best of us can't resist. But when you do, let the competition serve as a source of motivation, not a source of measurement. Then what should you measure? Measuring your dream against someone else's is toxic, but the idea of measuring progress is important. Without a way to measure what you're doing, you'll never really know how much your dream has grown as a result of all your hustle. To not take measurements or track your progress would be like starting a diet and never stepping on the scale or getting your body fat measured. On days when you didn't feel like you were making any progress, you'd have no way to refute that feeling with data. We need data. But what kind of data? Because some data is deadly. At least it was for me. And there's a counselor named Chuck who can verify that. I might be the first person in the history of therapy to need a counselor because of blog statistics. In the first 6 months of working on the Stuff Christians Like blog, I got really fascinated by Google Analytics, or GA. GA is a simple piece of code that will track any activity on your website. With a click of a button, you can instantly know how many unique visitors you had to your site, where they came from, what they read, and how long they stayed. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of ways to measure everything on your blog. I believe I use them all. At first, it was okay. I would check in a few times every day to see if I was getting a lot of comments, see how the page view numbers were, and measure a few other key stats. I'd get a little hit of adrenaline every time I saw something spike on the graph, and a little hit of depression every time something I wrote bottomed out. I liked seeing the instant feedback so much that I started to check GA every few hours, then every hour, and then every few minutes. I started to see the statistics not as a measure of my blog traffic, but as a measure of my self-worth. If the traffic was up, so was I. If it was down, so was I. I hit the refresh button on Firefox like a gambler pulling the lever of a slot machine. Eventually, when my obsession reached a peak, I decided to go back to my counselor and talk about it. That was a weird conversation and went something like this. Chuck the counselor. You've created an army of idols, Jon. Me. What do you mean, an army of idols? Chuck the counselor. The readers of your site have become an army of idols for you. You're worshiping them and dependent on them to dictate how you feel. And they're always attacking. Me. Wishing I was saying something more intelligent in case this conversation made it into a book later. How so? Chuck the counselor. If your readers give you affirmation, if they leave nice comments or affirm you with good traffic, you misappropriate that and use it to feel better about yourself. So that's essentially an attack because you're using it to cripple your innate self-worth. If your readers leave you a hateful comment, that's a direct attack. In both ways, you've set up a situation where you get attacked regardless of what happens. Chuck the counselor is smart because that's exactly what I did. If the traffic numbers weren't good when I posted in the morning, I would quickly write a new post for the afternoon, panicking that I was going to lose people. Instead of using the traffic as a tool, I let it become my master and responded accordingly depending on what the numbers said. I thought that I was perhaps the only one who did this until I heard business guru and best-selling author Seth Godin address this in a conference. Someone asked him how many subscribers he had to his blog. He told them he didn't know. Because if he knew, he'd be tempted to make that number grow, and he'd start to create content just to make the number grow. Then he said something that I think is so applicable to closing the gap between a day job and a dream job. You can't use analytics to figure out the message. In other words, you can't allow your results or the measurement of your progress to control your dream. What you do, the message, so to speak, has to be true and honest and come from the core of what you care about, not be a whim in the whirling winds of analytics. You might be better at this than I am. I'm not great at using analytics without getting all tangled in them. When I see that a post about Justin Bieber got the most traffic one month, I am tempted to write another post about Justin Bieber. But that's not what I started out to do. I never felt called to high traffic numbers. I felt called to share my ideas. Those are two different things. So for the most part, I now leave analytics alone. Thanks, Chuck. When I do use them, I try to look at the progress of a month instead of a day or a week. Because when you get obsessed with measuring the progress of your dream, no matter what it is, you overestimate the importance of a day. When I see traffic dip sharply on a Tuesday, it's easy to think the site is about to go under. But if I'm really committed to living out a 50-year dream, if the canvas on which I am painting is 5 decades big, then a single Tuesday doesn't hold a lot of weight. So if your dream is to open a restaurant, become a missionary, go back to school, or anything else, what should you measure? Measure hustle first. I think measuring the effort you're putting in is a much more honest gauge of your progress. It's also the only part of this process you can really control. There are a million factors that play into getting traffic on a website or closing a sale or any other sign of a hit for your dream. There's only one who impacts the amount of hustle. You. Measure the things you can control before the things you can't. You can measure the number of days you got up early to work on your dream. You can measure the number of emails you responded to on your website. You can measure the number of dream jobs you applied for. That is what's going to matter at first. And if you set a high hustle goal and miss it, you are rarely disappointed. You've still made progress. If you miss a hit goal, you're far more affected. My team leader set a huge, audacious sales goal for this book. If I miss it, if the book doesn't sell as many as we hoped, then we'll definitely have a conversation about that. He'll hold me accountable to that goal. But the first thing he'll really hold me accountable to is the hustle I put into making that goal happen. We'll measure my hustle. Did I speak as often as I could have? Did I hold as many smart promotions on my blog as I could have? Did I write the best possible book I could have? When the PR team at work needed things from me, was I quick to respond? When the sales team needed information, did I give it to them right away? When a speech didn't work well, did I rewrite it so that it was better the next time? These are the types of questions my boss will ask me, but they're also the questions I'll ask myself long before he calls a meeting. If I miss a goal, which sometimes happens when you set huge ones, I want the reassurance that I did everything in my power to make it happen. I want the peace in knowing that it wasn't for lack of hustling that I missed the target for my dream. I want to know that the one thing in my control was under control. I don't mean to say you should never measure your hits. You should. I did. We used Nielsen BookScan to gauge book sales and observed blog traffic to pick out the best cities for my book tour. I believe there's tremendous value in measuring hits. But the point is a matter of priority. Measure hits before hustle, and you're likely to end up failing in more ways than one. Measure hustle before hits, and the hits will come in due time. The next step is making sure you know what to do with that success. Chapter 7. Learn to be successful at success. Robert Downey Jr. ruined my impression of what happens to you when you publish a book. Well, he and Jodie Foster both had a part in crushing my childhood dreams. But if you see them, if you ever sit next to them on a flight, please don't bring the whole thing up. They'll pretend they don't know what you're talking about, but in your heart, you'll know they know, and you'll probably be detained by TSA for starting an in-air celebrity feud. There's a slim chance they don't remember what happened because they both make so many movies. I, on the other hand, have not forgotten. Years ago, Jodie Foster directed a film called Home for the Holidays, starring Downey Jr. It was an interesting movie based on a short story by a talented author named Chris Redant. So what, right? Wrong. There's a big so what with Chris Redant. I met her when I was writing branding and product descriptions at Bose. Prior to meeting her, I believed that if you wrote and published a book, from that moment on, you slept on piles of money. Though I made fun of that perception earlier in the book, it was the perception I once had too. I thought success as an author meant an instant rapper-level existence. Gold teeth, rims of diamonds, lighting money on fire just to watch it burn all pretty. Chris Redant popped that wildly inaccurate expectation of my dream for me. She wrote the book Home for the Holidays. Not only did she write it, but the book got turned into a movie. Not just an art film where a symbolic glass of milk is broken in slow motion over cobblestones with someone speaking soft French in the background. Her book was turned into a big Hollywood movie directed by Jodie Foster. In addition to the dump truck of cash you get for writing a book, she should have gotten a second dump truck of cash for the movie. She didn't. She was doing the exact same job I was at Bose. We were both in the same size cubicles, with the same responsibilities and the same corporate expectations. Was something wrong with Chris? Did she do a horrible job managing all her author cabbage? Nope. She was an incredibly talented author who worked hard on her craft. There was nothing wrong with Chris. Something was wrong with me. I had grossly failed to define what success looks like for a writer. I had greatly misinterpreted what success looks like for a dream, and it cost me years of frustration, years that I'd prefer you not go through. It's time to define. If I were an NFL player, one of my goals each year would be to stay out of news stories that involved me and the phrase outside a nightclub. Forget the injuries you receive out on the field, battling against 300-pound giants. The most dangerous place on the planet for a professional athlete is outside a nightclub. For those of us without a lucrative contract with an NFL team, the space outside a nightclub isn't that deadly. But if you're going to chase your dream, there's another space you need to be careful of. Success. It sounds ironic, but more dreamers fail in success than they do in failure. Success is like the Bermuda Triangle of dreams. There are two primary reasons. The first is that we tend to only view success as a good thing. We plan a million ways not to fail. We erect processes against failure and establish backup plans if things go wrong. We don't spend nearly as much time, if any at all, safeguarding ourselves from success. We strive for success. We reach for it. We yearn for it. We aim for it with everything we've got. And when we get a taste of it, we're often woefully unprepared for the challenges that come. The attention, the opportunities, the desire for people to tell you what you want to hear instead of what is true. All these multiply with success. You need to be prepared. The other reason success is so dangerous is that we get arrogant. No one gets cocky when they fail. No one ever says, that guy failed so badly that he got really full of himself and ended up alienating everyone in his life. Arrogance only runs with success, and it's dangerous. Author Malcolm Gladwell summarized this problem in a speech he gave. Incompetence irritates me, but overconfidence scares me. Incompetent people rarely have the opportunities to make mistakes that greatly affect things. But overconfident leaders and experts have the dangerous ability to create disaster. He was specifically referring to the business leaders who contributed to the housing market and credit collapse of 2008 to 2009. But he spoke a truth that applies to even the smallest dream. When you're dreaming alone in a cubicle at work, you have very little ability to really impact things. But when you start working on your dream, overcoming risks and hustling, you'll start to gather some momentum. You might not run a company of 10,000 people, but as a mom or dad, your dream decisions will greatly impact the lives of your children. As a single adult, your actions can have a surprising impact on the friends and family members who are cheering you on. If your dream involves giving back to your community or another country, whole parts of the world can be affected by what you do. And with the internet and social media, your ability to, as Gladwell explains, create disaster is only amplified. It only takes a handful of followers on Twitter or Facebook to get cocky. It only takes a few blog comments or purchases of your widget to feel like you're Leonardo DiCaprio on the bow of the Titanic, which might be a more accurate metaphor than you realize. As Jimmy Fallon, host of The Late Show, described his movie failures after his successful run on Saturday Night Live, you start thinking you're awesome, when the truth is, you're not. But isn't success what we're aiming for? I didn't start my blog with the hope that it would fall flat. I didn't write my books with the expectation that I could sell them slightly better than the average author. Not at all. I want you to be successful with your dream. I want all of us to be successful. I just don't want your success to kill your dream, which is why there's one critical thing you have to do before you get successful. Define your enough. When the Stuff Christians Like blog took off, I got nervous. All of a sudden, people were telling me I was special and interesting and smart and a whole lot of other things I'd never had groups of strangers tell me. I wasn't ready for it. I started to feel the tendrils of arrogance wrapping around my ankles. I started writing the blog with an almost maniacal level of focus. It became my obsession and started to cost me relationships. As a stopgap for that, I decided to interview leaders who seemed to have it all together. Some would meet with me for coffee. Some blew me off because despite thinking I was important, I had only a mildly successful niche blog. On the success ladder, I was very, very, very low. One of the leaders who agreed to meet with me was Lanny Donahoe, a comedian, author, camp founder, hybrid of an entertainer. We sat in his office one afternoon, an octagon-shaped room in an old Victorian house in Alpharetta, Georgia. On most of the 8 walls, he had big boards with ideas blocked out on colorful Post-it notes. It felt like being inside Saturday Night Live. I told him I was worried about what was happening with the modicum of success I was experiencing, and he told me a story. Here, in a complete paraphrase, because I had no idea how important this conversation would become, and certainly did not scribble it down lightning fast like a squirrel at the time, is what he said. John, people in stories you remember always say your name, but never usually do in real life. Have you ever used futureme.org? It's a site where you can send yourself emails in the future. You can write an email today and post it so that it comes to you in a week, a month, a year, whenever. I did that a year ago. I was working on a project that was killing me. The money was great. The opportunity was huge, but it was literally killing me. I was ill and stressed out and so unhappy. In that moment, a year ago, I fortunately had the clarity to send myself a message in the future. A few weeks ago, I found myself on the doorstep of another big opportunity. The money was great. The project was huge, and I was about to take it when a message from Lanny Donahoe to Lanny Donahoe showed up. Know what it said? Don't take projects like this ever again. You're in pain right now, getting crushed by this project. If you ever have a chance to take this type of project again, be careful. Say no, please. I had forgotten all about that situation. I had moved on and was about to jump back into that same type of situation. But I didn't because the me from a year ago sent a message to the me of today. At the time, I thought Lanny was being a little silly. I once saw him bring a live camel into a conference, so silly is definitely in his wheelhouse. But since I felt like I was drowning at the time, I tried it. I was wrong about Lanny's advice. It was an amazing experience. There's something really powerful about writing yourself a letter in the future. It forces you in an unexpectedly creative way to wrestle with what you really want out of life. It makes you strip away a lot of your layers and get down to some of your core truths. On April 12th, 2009, having just finished writing the Stuff Christians Like book, I sent myself an email a year before it would release. At the time, I worked at autotrader.com. I wouldn't move to